Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
They're putting patients at risk, and that is really a priority here.
Nurses speak out against their union, angry over its stance on mandatory vaccines. Also, the disappearance of a Langley woman, now a homicide investigation. And
if we as an organization are feeling this strain, what are families feeling?
Why everything from food to gas is costing more.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. The backlash is growing against the BC's Nurses Union for coming out against mandatory COVID vaccination for its members. The union knows people aren't happy and is trying to clarify its stance, but now working nurses are speaking publicly. Dan Burrett joins us live with more on this. Dan, what are their concerns?
Anita, this started with your interview yesterday with the BC Nurses Union, which touched off a wave of anger and frustration from nurses who disagree with their union and its position against mandatory vaccinations. The union claims it could cause staffing shortages when they're already stretched incredibly thin because of COVID, among other things. Some nurses are not buying that, tweeting things like, "I'm a registered nurse and believe their position is a devastating failure of leadership from the BCNU." Another tells us, "As health professionals, we owe our patients and co-workers everything we can do to improve their safety in this pandemic. In my opinion, this was the wrong call by the BCNU." These tweets continue. Another tells us, "A retired nurse here shocked that the BCNU is not encouraging vaccines during a pandemic. Health care means doing everything it takes to care and protect patients who are vulnerable and compromised. Shame." Now, another nurse is speaking with us on the record, on camera, against her union's stance. Johanna Wagstaffe says she's disappointed and discouraged. She argues an unvaccinated nurse who wears full PPE is not full protection.
And I'm embarrassed, too, that nurses who are should be using clinical evidence and science-based language are citing staffing concerns as a reason not to be vaccinated, because we know that someone who's ill with COVID is going to create far more staffing shortages and stress on the system than asking a nurse to be vaccinated to keep her coworkers and her patients safe.
Okay, Dan, clearly a lot of uproar here. I know on the tweet of the video of the interview yesterday with the union, it was just constant. People replying all day long, upset with the union. So what is the union saying today?
Well, it appears they are hearing the backlash, as you say. In what it calls a clarification, the BCNU says it does support mass vaccination and notes a very high percentage of its membership is vaccinated. But it says in part, it is important to note the percentage of those who are unvaccinated is not distributed evenly across the province. This reality can pose desperate staffing challenges in work sites where staffing is already stretched incredibly thin. It also goes on to say, the question for this government is how it intends to staff units where there are unvaccinated staff. The union adds the small percentage of members who are unvaccinated, for them, it wants health employers to use rapid testing, strict PPE rules, and redeployment to manage those challenges. Dr. Bonnie Henry earlier this week said the province will consider medical and religious exemption requests on a case-by-case basis. But for nurses who don't get one and who won't get vaccinated, Henry warned, be prepared not to work and not to be paid. And you can see your full interview with Johanna Wagstaffe later in the newscast. Anita.
Dan Burrett live tonight. Thanks, Dan. Despite the BC vaccine card coming into effect, daily cases are not slowing down. 661 positive COVID-19 cases today. Sadly, we hit another high in deaths. 7 more people have died in the past 24 hours. Hospitalizations remain steady at 288. In the past 2 weeks, almost 82% in hospital have been unvaccinated, but at least 3 people have been taken out of intensive care. That's down slightly to 137.
The government has reluctantly decided to adopt the restriction exemption program, a proof of vaccination program for participation in certain discretionary activities that have a higher risk of viral transmission.
One province over, and Alberta Premier Jason Kenney has declared a state of public health emergency. In just one day, the province has reported more than 1,600 new COVID cases, and 24 people have died. Hospitals are expected to run out of ICU beds in the next 10 days. Now, after denying calls to reinstate COVID restrictions, Kenney is relenting. New mandates include physical distancing, a ban on gatherings of unvaccinated people, and by September 20th, proof of vaccination. And if it feels like the cost of just about everything is going up right now, it's because it is. Canada's inflation rate has hit its highest point in nearly 2 decades. As Isabelle Regem reports, it could mean things are going to get a lot harder for people who are already struggling.
Every week, Backpack Buddies gives 4,000 BC kids a bag filled with enough food so they don't go hungry when they're not at school on weekends.
Everything from juice to cereal.
Now, it's unlikely the charity will be able to increase the number of kids it helps, as several suppliers have already warned them of a spike in prices.
Mainstays of our program increasing anywhere from 4% to 38%. So our rough calculation is that that's going to increase our monthly food bill at least $10,000 a month.
It's not just food that's putting a bigger dent in our wallets. Housing prices and the cost of gas are also up.
Drive way less than before. It's getting ridiculous.
It's definitely challenging. I think about my road trips when I'm on the road a little bit more now.
They are among factors fueling a leap in the national inflation rate to 4.1% in August, the highest since 2003, and up from 3.7% in July.
It's becoming a little more challenging, especially for household affordability at this current time.
This economist says the pandemic has been a driving factor in the spike.
It has been supply chain disruption, just the fact there hasn't been enough supply of microchips. There's been issues in shipping due to COVID globally.
He also points to a slowdown in the economy last year, and now we're seeing a bit of a rebound. He expects we'll see a leveling off when things return to normal, but no drastic drop. Back at the warehouse, staff fear the inflation rate will translate into more food insecurity in our communities.
If we as an organization are feeling this strain, what are families feeling in the grocery stores when they're going to buy food each week?
Which could mean more families desperately needing the help of these food-filled bags. Isabelle Regem, CBC News, North Vancouver.
We have some breaking news to tell you about now. Dozens of Vancouver police officers are on scene at the Fairmont Pacific Rim Hotel following reports of gunshots late this afternoon. Janella Hamilton is reporting live from the busy downtown neighborhood. Janella, what can you tell us?
Well, Anita, an area that is usually hustling and bustling with activity this time of day is quite quiet. Police have blocked off a section on Canada Place between Burrard Street and the Jackpool Plaza. What we do know is the Vancouver police are on scene investigating a shooting that happened in the parkade of the Fairmont Pacific Rim. We can see behind me the yellow police tape is blocking off the parkade. We do see that they are letting people leave the parkade, although we haven't seen anyone go into the parkade. We saw forensics teams and detectives as well go into the parkade, and they are investigating. I spoke to a woman who actually mentioned shortly before 4 o'clock today, she heard a lot of chaos. She saw a bunch of police cars drive into both sides of the parkade. She said it was something out of a movie as well. A lot of people who are passing by are just saying they're really shocked to hear that a shooting has happened in this area, and they are really quite concerned for their safety.
Janella Hamilton reporting live in downtown Vancouver. Thanks, Janella. Homicide investigators are now involved in the case of a Langley woman missing for 3 weeks. The 40-year-old mother and kindergarten teacher was last seen leaving her home near 200th Street and 50th Avenue on August 28th. Naomi Onotera's family reported her missing the next day. Langley RCMP have been conducting a missing persons investigation. Now IHIT is assisting. And a BC man who murdered a family of 6 nearly 40 years ago has again been denied parole. David Shearing pleaded guilty to 6 counts of second-degree murder in 1984. He was sentenced to life in prison for killing George and Edith Bentley and 4 family members on a camping trip at Wells Gray Provincial Park in 1982. Shearing, who now goes by the name David Ennis, was denied parole in 2008 and again in 2012. Friends and families of the victims petitioned against his latest application for parole. And activists held a vigil for the 4 coyotes killed so far in Stanley Park. They're calling on the province to stop culling the animals. Activists gathered outside the Vancouver Park Board to say the strategy is not an effective way to solve a problem caused by people feeding wild animals. They oppose the use of leg-hold traps, but the Ministry of Forests argues the approach is humane. The province has said relocating coyotes is not an option and is planning to put down nearly 3 dozen coyotes in the park, though the total number may turn out to be much lower. Well, they've filled the streets of India and here in the Lower Mainland as well. Tens of thousands of farmers protesting new agricultural laws for the past 10 months. Legislation they say will destroy their livelihoods. They're now taking to the streets with a new target, a key state election. As Salima Shivji reports, it could put pressure on India's national government.
It's been nearly 10 months since this protest against India's new farming laws was set up, and it's still standing entrenched. This is the lineup for free milk being handed out, and the mood here is buoyant. Even after the country was beset by a debilitating second wave of COVID-19, even after very difficult weather conditions, Delhi has been hit with heavy rains recently. Numbers here at the protest camp have gone up and down, but it really hasn't affected the resolve of the farmers that they really want these farming laws repealed. They say the laws will destroy livelihoods, whereas Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government insists that the farmers will be helped by the laws and it will modernize the industry. But many of the farmers here have been here since day one, and they say they're feeling rejuvenated now, says this one. Rejuvenated after what he sees as a major win. He was at Karnal, a town deep in the neighboring state of Haryana, where farmers staged a sit-in outside a government office for days, angry that violence was used to disperse a crowd blocking a highway at a previous protest. Angry also that a government official was caught on video encouraging police officers to, quote, smash the heads of protesters. The farmers got what they wanted, a promised investigation into the incident, and they've made their political strength felt in another key state. A massive protest earlier this month in Uttar Pradesh, India's most populous state that has a key election coming up early next year. Modi's party, the BJP, is in power, but the farmers are vowing to rally against the ruling party.
Farmers as one political force have never been stronger throughout India's history. And Western Uttar Pradesh, there is a very high probability that the BJP will face a strong resistance.
A sign of the farmers' potential political heft. Even in the midst of a pandemic, these protests are very much a thorn in the Modi government's side. Salima Shivji, CBC News, Delhi.
Organizers of a fundraiser to help First Nations on Vancouver Island search for Indigenous remains have handed the Snuneymuxw First Nation $77,000 to search the former Nanaimo Indian Hospital. The hospital operated from 1946 to 1967. It was built to treat Indigenous people with tuberculosis. It was one of 29 run by the Department of National Health and Welfare. The First Nation will use the funds for ground-penetrating radar equipment to search for graves.
Our people were treated less than human as medical experiments and disposed of without regard to the sacredness of human life.
In July, the fundraisers awarded $75,000 to the Hauset First Nation to search the grounds of 2 former residential schools. And a Vancouver care home is undergoing a change and will no longer be named for a BC politician who pursued racist policies. The George Pearson Centre was named for the cabinet minister who, in the 1940s, lobbied for the forced deportation of all Japanese Canadians and people of Japanese descent. According to Vancouver Coastal Health, a community group highlighted this history. The health authority is now collaborating with local groups to choose a culturally appropriate name. Well, here's something pretty cool. Howe Sound has earned a special UNESCO designation as a biosphere reserve, marking its status as an important natural area worth protecting. If you've spent any time along the sea to sky, you know the sweeping views that make the fjords famous. The mountains are home to hundreds of species, plus thousands of marine animals in the estuary, including glass sponge reefs once thought to be extinct. The reserve is 218,000 hectares in size, from Gibsons and West Vancouver inland to Black Tusk near Whistler. It becomes Canada's 19th UNESCO biosphere region, following a campaign that took 5 years.
So it's intended to attract education, be a place for learning, for more research, and continue to be a place where people connect with nature.
At Catsum is the Squamish place name for the Howe Sound, and the nation supports the new status, saying the designation recognizes its role in the region and helps protect Howe Sound for future generations. Really nice to see this happen. The area needs to be protected, absolutely. It's so beautiful.
Oh, it's gorgeous, Anita. Yeah, it's funny. I noticed people right across Canada pumped today about this on social media, and rightfully so. Now, interestingly, you're going to love how I tie this into today's forecast. Howe Sound was actually helping channel some of those northwesterly winds that we saw, right the south coast. Here's a look at the winds this morning out towards Jericho Beach and downtown, really along the beaches, getting the strongest of the wind gusts between 60 and 70 kilometers per hour. Some boats became unmoored, as you can see here. And we did have a few hundred without power today in separate sections across the city. UBC seeing most of those power outages. Winds have eased, but this is the big picture right now. Latest satellite radar shot, some actual lightning strikes up towards the Whistler area. This is the northwesterly flow we've got behind that cold front that brought us the rain yesterday. But building off our west coast is the high pressure that gave us the gorgeous blue sky, and it certainly was a gorgeous one out there with crisp temperatures and breezy winds. It felt like a perfect fall day, dare I say. We've got one more in the forecast for tomorrow, but this is what we're watching for Thursday night into Friday. Environment Canada already issuing that special weather statement for what could be our biggest rain event in about 4 months, Anita. It looks like in 24 hours, we'll get more rain than we've had all summer. So I'll break that down coming up in a bit.
Wow. Okay. Thanks, Johanna.
You're welcome.
The White Rock Lake wildfire left destruction in its wake after tearing through parts of BC's southern interior last month. For the rest of this week, we'll be hearing from people threatened by that fire. And tonight, we meet a couple who had just moved from Chilliwack to the rural town of Falkland when they had to suddenly pack up and go.
We got a knock on the door at 10:30 in the evening, which we're early to bed. So we were already, I was sleeping for 2 hours. Yeah. And we barely heard it, and we were told that we had to leave.
They didn't even tell us that we had until noon the next day to get out. They led us to believe that we have to get out now. So we ran around here in a panic, trying to pick up a whole bunch of stuff.
You are alerted in the middle of the night, you're scared, and it's like, what the hell do I grab? You know, what is important? You know, and the weird things that you do grab and then the things that you don't grab, really weird. And of course, I'm trying to think of me and him and our dog, and, you know, he's thinking in a certain way, and yeah, it was pretty scary. It's kind of sad, and if I can do anything to support the community, I would just say that since I'm given this opportunity, I really stress that the government has to take a good hard look at how they're managing fires
smaller
and
communities and,
you know,
rural places,
and the rights of the people to protect their property and to participate, especially the ranchers and Indigenous people that obviously have some idea of, you know, how to deal with this.
And we'll hear from more people who lost their homes all this week. Thanks for being with us tonight on CBC News at 6 o'clock. I'm your host, Anita Bathe. And if you're not already doing it, you can always watch our program live on the free app, CBC Gem. You can also catch us on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. In Saskatchewan, as COVID numbers soar, an unusual and alarming trend. 20% of new infections are among children under the age of 12. What it means next. Thanks for staying with us during our commercial-free live stream. Well, what began as a tribute to a well-known elder at a community center in Saskatoon has snowballed into an initiative that led to flowers blooming around the care home. Here's the story behind the Sunshine Project.
Ground isn't all that prepped. Planting is to hope for something, and you plant a seed because you hope to see it grow, and it gives us that chance to look forward to something. The Sunshine Project was inspired by so many people here. Just the strength and resilience that I've seen through the elders and staff and family. Everybody together was looking for brighter times in this, and I really feel that a sunflower is representative of just that. It looks for the sun all day, and that's kind of what it seems like we've been doing for the last year as well, so seems like a natural progression.
I think it's a really awesome idea because it helps the residents be more happy about life, and there's actually meaning to life, and it just brings joy to everybody out in Sherbrooke.
The inspiration came from many people, but Dr. Grant was a resident here who was also known as Dr. Sunshine. I had mentioned to her that I have a heritage garden where I put important flowers for important women in my life, but that she's not a perennial, she's more of an annual, and she's a sunflower. And with her being known as Dr. Sunshine, I figured a sunflower is a good one for her. Another person who's really inspired me is Brad Trevison, who's just started gardening and has been a rock star with it. And we've kind of, he kind of helped motivate me to make this happen.
My summer's been pretty busy with the sunflower project that we've been doing. The sunflowers have been really good. We've been trying to water as much as we could, even with this hot heat and stuff.
The sunflower seemed like a great choice for a few options. Again, kind of their resilience, they always turn towards the sun and they look for that brightness, and I think that's kind of significant to our time in COVID here. They're a large enough flower that we can see them from all throughout the building, so we don't always have to be outside to see them. One sunflower is a great thing, but put a whole bunch out together and they kind of make you stop and go, huh.
This election campaign has been short but turbulent, and all three major parties have been caught up in controversy. Two candidates are now apologizing for making inflammatory comments, and as Marina von Stackelberg reports, a third one was recently assaulted in his campaign office.
What was wrong with your vetting process?
It was a rough morning for the NDP. Two of their contenders have pulled out of the race after they made anti-Semitic posts on Twitter.
These candidates made a decision to leave. I think that was the right decision. I want to be very clear. Their comments were completely wrong and have no place in our party.
Sydney Coles, running in Toronto, falsely blamed Israel for taking vaccines meant for the United States. Nova Scotia candidate Dan Osborne is accused of asking if Auschwitz was real. He says he doesn't remember doing that, but hasn't denied it. Both have apologized. The Conservatives are saying sorry too, after Manitoba incumbent Ted Falk was quoted in a local newspaper saying vaccines increase your risk of getting the Delta variant. That is not true. His riding of Provencher is a Conservative stronghold and the site of many anti-vaccine protests. Infections there are fueling Manitoba's fourth wave.
The candidate in question apologized and clarified the record.
And when it comes to vaccines, I think all Canadians know how we've been fighting for vaccine access for a year.
Liberal candidate Mark Saray was attacked at his Sudbury, Ontario campaign office. Police say a woman yelled at him, pushed a table towards him, and then pinned him against a wall. A 56-year-old woman has now been charged with assault with a weapon. Police have not said what her motive was.
People need to feel safe in Canada, and over the past years, unfortunately, we've seen a rise in intolerance and acts of hatred, not just in a political context, but across the country.
The Liberals faced criticism from one of their own supporters, Mississauga's former long-standing mayor, 100-year-old Hazel McCallion.
I think it's unfortunate there was an election called during the pandemic. I don't agree with that.
A criticism that still dogs the Liberal campaign just 5 days before voters head to the polls. Marina von Stackelberg, CBC News, Ottawa.
Election day is fast approaching, and while some British Columbians voted early, others are still trying to make up their minds. Here are a few things you should know about the election in our province before heading to the polls.
British Columbians are heading to the polls for the second time during the pandemic, and this time it's a federal election.
Parliament needs an opportunity to get a mandate from Canadians.
Liberal leader Justin Trudeau wants to form a majority government after winning a minority government in 2019. But polls show the majority of Canadians don't think the election should be happening in the middle of the fourth wave. Regardless, September 20th is Election Day, so here's what you need to know. BC holds 42 of the 338 seats in the House of Commons. Before the election was called, the Conservatives held 17 of those seats. The Liberals and NDP each had 11. The Greens had 2, and BC had 1 independent. So how might the seats in BC change this election?
The Liberals are sort of holding steady at that 2019 number, at least on the polls that we have for BC. And the Conservatives have dropped a little bit, but the seat projections might still be about the same for them. The only real big difference is the NDP surging a little bit here in the province.
It's an election where I've never seen so many undecided voters, even at this point. So I think people will be staying up late in Ontario and watching what happens in BC.
One nail-biter will be Port Moody Coquitlam. It was one of the closest races in the country in the 2019 election. The Conservatives beat out the NDP by just 153 votes. The area's demographics are rapidly changing, with younger families moving from Vancouver in search of more affordable housing. Then there's Vancouver Granville. Jody Wilson-Raybould has held this seat since 2015. Justin Trudeau booted her from the Liberal Party after the SNC-Lavalin affair in 2019, but she won her seat again as an independent. Now she's called it quits, and the Liberals are hoping to reclaim the riding. But they're dealing with the fallout from reports that their candidate flipped multiple houses in recent years. Over on Vancouver Island, the Greens are looking to retain their 2 seats. Former party leader Elizabeth May is expected to win the Saanich Gulf Islands riding again, but Nanaimo Ladysmith has become a battleground.
The Conservatives, NDPs are really, putting a lot of energy and money into that riding. They want that Green seat.
The parties just have 4 weeks to convince voters. So what are British Columbians most concerned about? For starters, the environment and climate change. The province suffered devastating wildfires and a record-breaking heat wave this past summer. The protests against old-growth logging at Fairy Creek have also garnered international attention.
I think a lot of people are still thinking, well, how come we haven't met our targets and how come we're still behind other G7 countries in terms of our reductions? So I think there is the issue for the Liberals.
Housing affordability is another key issue. While provinces have more control, the feds can still pull some levers, things like foreign homeowner taxes, mortgage interest rates, and funding for affordable housing. The NDP is emphasizing renters and social housing, while the Conservatives and Liberals are catering to homeowners and those wanting to enter the market. But some housing experts warn the platforms don't go far enough to curb soaring real estate prices.
It's difficult to say that one party has come out on top in that particular debate in British Columbia. I think it's really about certain demographics being targeted by each of the parties.
So once you've made up your mind, how does voting work? There are 4 ways to cast a ballot. You might have already voted at an advanced poll between September 10th and 13th. Elections Canada also allowed voting at its offices up until September 14th and will accept mail-in ballots from anyone registered by that date. If you're still deciding though, don't worry. Double-check your voting card to see your assigned location and bring ID. If you don't have any, you can still vote, as long as you have someone to vouch for you who can provide their identity and address. And once you've cast a ballot, don't be surprised if you have to wait for results.
Depending on how close the race is as well, we might not be able to call a winner on election night. We might have to wait a few days until all of the mailed-in ballots are counted.
Back to COVID-19 now. In Saskatchewan, kids under 12 are testing positive for the virus more than any other age group in the province. As Alexander Crohn reports, they make up 20% of all new cases for the second day in a row.
Saskatchewan is finally releasing information on the number of COVID-19 cases for those who are unable to get vaccinated, children under the age of 12. In the 2 days that we received that data, roughly 20% of cases have been among those 12 and under. As of yesterday, 2 of those children are in hospital. A clinical microbiologist at the University of Saskatchewan says it should be a wake-up call for those who are unvaccinated.
By having members within the family unit vaccinated, that in fact serves to protect other members within the family who are unvaccinated because they're ineligible, like with children. So I think by having that data, hopefully it will convince those people that have been hesitant about vaccination to go ahead and get vaccinated, recognizing that it's important to protect their children.
Joseph Blondeau applauds the province's decision to release this data. He says it provides transparency and a better understanding of how the virus is spreading. But he says it's difficult to tell a trend in the under 12 age group as we only have 2 days worth of data. Children generally have a more mild response to COVID-19, but we should all remain concerned about the spread of the virus in the province. Alexander Crohn, CBC News, Regina.
Simone Biles and other U.S. gymnasts are calling out the FBI and others for their failures in the investigation of Larry Nassar. He's the disgraced former U.S. gymnastic doctor now convicted of sexual abuse. Katie Simpson shows us the powerful testimony from athletes.
If you'd raise your right hand.
They are survivors determined not to let history repeat itself, sharing their deeply painful trauma with lawmakers in the pursuit of accountability.
To be clear, I blame Larry Nassar, and I also blame an entire system that enabled and perpetrated his abuse.
Simone Biles and 3 of her teammates used today's hearing to demand the FBI face consequences for its mishandling of sexual abuse allegations against the team's former doctor, Larry Nassar. An independent report found agents waited months before doing anything about the claims, allowing Nassar to abuse dozens of additional victims.
It was like serving innocent children up to a pedophile on a silver platter.
They're also demanding independent investigations of the U.S. Olympic Committee and USA Gymnastics, which they say failed to protect them.
I'm deeply and profoundly sorry to each and every one of you.
Today marked the first time lawmakers were able to question the head of the FBI on what went so very wrong. Christopher Wray was not in charge at the time and had few answers.
On no planet is what happened in this case acceptable.
Senators now want to see legal action pursued against the agents involved, but the Department of Justice refused to participate in today's hearing, which the victims found insulting.
The message that they are sending that abuse doesn't matter.
There's been no public explanation as to why no charges have been laid. Survivors and lawmakers may have to wait until October for answers. That's when the Attorney General is expected to appear before the same committee. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Washington.
They're reasoning against mandatory vaccines for nurses, but they just simply can't afford to lose a single employee. The union is now facing an onslaught from angry nurses. We speak to one next.
Well, I'm sure that many of you have had the opportunity to fly somewhere, and I'm sure that many others of you who haven't had that opportunity yet will one day have such an opportunity. If you haven't, why not come on a flight with us right now? A short flight maybe, but one that has a great deal of enjoyment to it, and one that is used every day by many businessmen in Vancouver. It's a flying trip from Vancouver to Victoria, the capital of the province of British Columbia. Victoria is situated on an island, as you know, and it takes 5.5 hours to reach the city from the mainland by sea. But every day, every morning, there's a special businessman's flight from Vancouver. Takes only 20 minutes, just about time to read your newspaper. Just in your seat, and we're off the ground. Doesn't take very long before Vancouver Island looms into sight. And it seems only a few minutes before the plane touches down in Victoria. Pretty special way of commuting to work, don't you think? From the Victoria Air Terminal, passengers are taken downtown by a bus which stops at a number of convenient terminals. It's almost a sightseeing tour in itself as the bus travels to the city. There are the Parliament buildings, and of course Victoria's famous hanging flower pots are available, as is the Empress Hotel, another central stopping point. But then at the end of the day, if you want to come back for a relaxing way, there's the return by the Canadian Pacific ferry boat. Captain Doyle is the skipper of the Princess Joan. Gangway up, we're casting off now. One of the pleasures of leaving Victoria Harbour is to see the ships that have crowded in from various parts of the world. The radar scanner charts the course. If they wish, the passengers may retreat to the comfortable saloon below decks. Or if they wish, enjoy a meal in the big dining room. Then at the end of the trip, there's the glittering lights of the city of Vancouver.
Here are some of the stories we're following tonight on CBC Vancouver News. Dozens of officers are on scene at the Fairmont Pacific Rim Hotel right now. They're investigating a shooting. The area is taped off from Burrard Street to Jack Pool Plaza. The homicide team is now on the case of missing Langley woman Naomi Onotera. She disappeared 3 weeks ago, but since Monday, her home has been behind police tape and officers have been inside.
There's been supply chain disruption, just the fact there hasn't been enough supply of microchips. There's been issues in shipping due to COVID globally.
Canada's inflation rate has hit its highest point in nearly 2 decades, and that's causing the price of many things to rise. Everything from food and housing to gas is costing you more. Advocates worry this will push some families to the limit. The backlash isn't stopping against the BC Nurses Union for coming out against mandatory COVID vaccination for its members. Our interview yesterday with the union got a lot of attention, including many angry messages from nurses. So today we are speaking with Josanne Dubois, a registered nurse in Vancouver. Josanne, thanks for being with us today.
You're welcome.
You've told us you're disappointed and you're discouraged by your union's position. Why is that?
I'm discouraged because I think that they're undermining the campaign to get herd immunity and mass vaccination And I think they're undermining the incentive for nurses to get vaccinated if they feel that the union is behind them. I think that they're putting patients at risk, and that is really a priority here. They're putting their patients and they're putting the nurses' co-workers at risk if they don't support nurses having mandatory vaccines. And the patients that we encounter don't wear PPE. So the fact that a nurse could be unvaccinated and wear PPE, that's not full protection. And I'm embarrassed too that that nurses who are should be using clinical evidence and science-based language are citing staffing concerns as a reason not to be vaccinated, because we know that someone who's ill with COVID is going to create far more staffing shortages and stress on the system than asking a nurse to be vaccinated to keep her coworkers and her patients safe.
When we asked the nurses union about that yesterday, and the union simply said, no, that's not true, that actually more staff will be taken out by this mandatory vaccine rule. Now, the union just put out another news release clarifying its statement, saying that there are smaller communities with fewer resources, and those are the communities that are really going to be hurt by this. What do you say to that?
Well, the smaller communities with fewer resources should have actually a higher vaccination rate because they don't have the massive ICUs that we have, and they don't have the large pool of casual staff that we can draw on. They may not have the access to student nurses that we employ in these times to help at vaccine clinics and in the long-term care. So I think it's even more important that those nurses are encouraged and given incentive to be vaccinated. Maybe they need an education campaign instead for the nurses who aren't listening to science.
Well, and to be fair, the union is coming out and saying that we still are encouraging all members to get vaccinated. But I want to know how you think the union could have handled this differently, because we have heard from other unions representing healthcare workers, and they haven't had the same stance as your union.
I would have liked to have been polled as a member, first of all, so that they were actually speaking for the members who are on the front lines. And, you know, I matter too. I'm a union member too, and I don't want to work beside a coworker who isn't vaccinated and feels the union is backing them. What other strategy? They could have done an education campaign. They could be reaching out to those members and asking them, you know, doing the questions that promote critical thinking among their nursing members to support them getting vaccinated.
Okay, and before we let you go, I want to ask you, because this question has come up a lot on social media from people who don't work in healthcare. They want to know, can patients refuse care from an unvaccinated nurse?
I don't know, and I haven't had the question myself. We screen we call them clients before we see them about whether they're symptomatic and whether they've been vaccinated, but I haven't had the question. But I think a patient has a right to ask that, and I think they have the right to refuse unsafe care. And to me, care from an unvaccinated person, even if they're wearing PPE, is not safe care.
Johanna Dubois is a nurse in Vancouver. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
You're welcome.
Kian Vegden lives with Crohn's disease, but he's determined not to hide his challenges. Why the Burnaby teen has penned a book. Next. And at 6:43, a live look at the Victoria Harbour. The Clipper Ferry in port. The company starts trips between Seattle and Victoria on Friday. Will it be smooth sailings this weekend? While Johanna has a look at the weather, maybe the answer next. Meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe is back with a look at the forecast, and what a beauty day, Joe. I'm hoping we have one more in us.
You know what? I got one more up my sleeve, and then that's it for for the rest of the season. Now, we always see some nice ones coming up, but it really will feel like a switch starting tomorrow night into Friday. But yes, tomorrow is going to be gorgeous. Let me show you what I see laid out in front of us on the satellite. Beautiful high pressure will be our story once again tomorrow. You can see as we look westward, the Pacific Ocean is clear. So we will see more of those blue skies over the next 24 hours. But that system brewing in the clouds, that is our rainmaker starting Thursday overnight into Friday. And just a quick look again at that special weather statement that may be upgraded to a warning as we get closer to the event. 30 to 50 millimeters for Metro Vancouver just in the Thursday overnight to Wednesday period. And we may end up seeing some higher amounts for some locations. So authorities already asking people as I track this storm towards us to think about clearing their storm drains, especially after a windy day like today. The trees are especially stressed this year because of the heat and dry conditions. So think about clearing the storm drains early. There's that front pausing you tomorrow at 4 p.m. That's when we'll watch for clouds to move in across Metro Vancouver, but the rain should hold off until sort of midnight, 1 a.m. Pausing you 10 a.m. though. Look at all the yellows, that bullseye really in through the south coast. We're seeing the heaviest of the downpours across the province as the fire hose sort of takes aim on our neck of the woods. But tomorrow, you wouldn't know what was brewing in the Pacific. Look at those icons. Lots of sun from the northwest through to the Kootenays. Port Hardy, Prince Rupert, you'll see that rain after about noon. That's what's coming to the rest of the south coast, but a lovely day. Temperatures rebounding a couple of degrees like today, a little warmer tomorrow and a little less breezy to boot. Just taking you through the rainfall accumulation really doesn't start going until Friday, and sort of this high resolution model really only goes till 6 a.m. But I wanted to show you already by commute time Friday morning, we could be looking at 5 to 10 millimeters of rain on the ground. 18 for tomorrow, and then look at that temperature drop on Friday. This system's going to come with some cooler air that'll linger through the weekend. At this point, Saturday looks like it might be bookended by showers. You could be lucky to get a break in the middle. Sunday, some sunshine. But Anita, this definitely is going to be more rain than the Pacific Northwest. This is a big deal for Seattle and Portland as well. More rain than we've all seen all summer long. So get ready.
Okay, you're going to turn on your heat?
I'm going to think about it. I'm going to get the double blankets out, the double socks. And yeah, this could be the first heat weekend.
Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome.
More than 7,000 young people live with Crohn's or colitis across the country. One teen here in Burnaby has taken his diagnosis and journey and sketched it into a book. As our Zara Premji explains, he's hoping to break the stigma and silence around the chronic illness.
My name is Kian, and this is my Crohn's bucket.
16 and struggling with an illness.
No one else can see it, but it's always with me. I didn't really know what was going on. I just thought, oh, it'll go away.
Until 7 months later, when Kian Vigdani was diagnosed with Crohn's disease.
So at the beginning, I thought, okay, why is it me that has to go through this? Like, what did I do to deserve this?
Crohn's is a lifelong chronic autoimmune disease inflaming the intestines, and Kian quickly learned a lot of other kids have it and are confused about it too.
And then I thought, okay, maybe I'll change the narrative about what people expect Crohn's disease patients to have.
So the teen used his experience to teach. Writing a book.
I may also have tummy pain, have a fever, or feel nauseous.
The goal?
Make sure that kids who are just got diagnosed with Crohn's disease don't go through too much pain. They're already going through physical pain. I don't want them to go through too much emotional pain.
Pain he wants to alleviate through his book called My Crohn's Bucket.
I came across bucket because buckets are very different. Like you could have a round bucket, you could have a long bucket, you could have like a squiggly bucket, and Crohn's disease is different for every person.
Kian is one of more than 7,000 children under the age of 18 living with Crohn's or colitis across the country. Crohn's and Colitis Canada says the prevalence of the disease in children has risen more than 50% over the last 10 years. And this is why Kian is donating all of the proceeds from his book to charity. He says writing 3 books may have been about helping others, but it did something for him along the way too.
The 3 books are like the stages of grief. Like the first one was to distract. The second one was like sort of getting there. And then the last one is finally acceptance, opening up.
And he hopes his opening up and his donation at the end of the month will provide support for some of the 300,000 other Canadians impacted by the disease.
I may feel very tired and rest a lot.
Zara Premji, CBC News, Burnaby.
It's not easy to travel thousands of kilometers from home away from family to work on a farm. But for one group of migrant workers, music has been key to keeping their spirits up. Meet the Latin Power Band next.
You never have to check the calendar to know the month you're in because of this. Traffic. Clearly it's September. School's in, and getting to where you want to go just got a whole lot slower. It's not just that the students are back. Halifax is more like an obstacle course with new road changes seemingly every day. What does that sign mean? You can only go right? Roadwork and construction make for a very slow go. And where you thought you could once go, now you can't. Which brings me here, to this intersection at Oxford Street, a long-standing shortcut street through the neighborhood of Okanagan. But that's about to change. Now the only thing that can go straight through? Cyclists and pedestrians. Here comes another driver going straight, though.
Yes.
Clearly not everyone got the message, but like anything new, it's confusing for some who seem to miss the signs.
I've seen drivers not understand it, but then I've also seen pedestrians not understand it either.
I think the most confusing part is the whole bike system and about cars turning. Right. It used to be able to, everyone could go every way.
This is what's new here. It's called the half signal, and it gives the power to change the light to red to the cyclists and pedestrians with the push of a button. It's a first in Nova Scotia, but popular in other Canadian cities where active transportation is farther ahead. To help with the learning curve, the city's put out a How to Cross the Street video.
Yeah, there's definitely a transitional period of education where people are still learning about the intersection and how to use it.
Siobhan Witherby is an active transportation planner with the city, excited that the first half signal is here because it signals just how serious the city is to get people walking or cycling instead of all this.
The reason why we're doing this is to give people transportation options, make it easier for them to choose walking and cycling for their transportation trips. And ultimately that helps us meet the mode share goals in the regional plan, the integrated mobility plan towards increasing walking and cycling.
Still, there's a lot of worry as cyclists watch drivers drive straight through.
I don't know, to be honest. There's a lot of people that break those rules here, so not sure if it's worth it.
This is the educational phase for this intersection, and they'll soon start enforcing the rules. That'll mean tickets. They want to make this safe and accessible and bring this technology to other intersections. The end game, get you out of your car and seeing the option of active transportation as viable and safe. Colleen Jones, CBC News, Halifax.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell. Here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
Join CBC Vancouver's Anita Bathe at the virtual Surrey Fusion Festival, an online celebration of food, music, and culture featuring concerts, a cooking challenge, and more. Visit surreyfusionfestival.ca for more info. And don't miss Canoe Culture's Hokomo, a new exhibit at the Vancouver Maritime Museum that honors Indigenous maritime cultures of the past and present. Go to vanmaritime.com to learn more.
Migrant farm workers here in BC and across the country face long stretches away from home and long days of work. It can be isolating and difficult, but as Jennifer Lagrassa reports, some of them have come together to battle the emotional challenges with music.
That's Arturo Almanza playing his first big Canadian show. The thrill and excitement of live music is something he's familiar with. He used to play music back home in Mexico and never thought he'd get the chance to publicly play here. During the day, he and many of his Latin power band members work in nearby greenhouses. After 12-hour days, they come together to play.
I joined because it brings me a lot of joy, and it also helped in not only just being in the farm and maybe, you know, having some negative or difficult thoughts. Some of the guys that we know were having issues with depression, or sometimes they were having addiction problems. So for us, this is a way of supporting each other. It helps us step away from our problems, from the stress, just from work. It allows us just to concentrate on something positive like music.
Some haven't seen their family in nearly 2 years. Others have missed out on seeing their kids grow up. This and the long workdays make living here difficult. But the music is a piece of home that unites them. What began as a two-man band at the end of last year quickly turned into 14.
Feeling so proud for singing this song for everybody.
When they start doing that for me, see the process is unbelievable how they change. Now they are more happy, they're exciting.
Many of them have played music since they were young, performing in bands back home. Others are just learning.
There's nothing that I can compare to it now, to be there and just to feel the energy.
The band just wants to come together, play music, and share some happiness. Jennifer LaGrassa, CBC News, Leamington.
Thanks so much for watching CBC Vancouver News tonight. You can always find us online at cbc.ca/BC or any of our social media platforms. And we're back tomorrow. Good evening.